Namaskar and welcome to Spiritual Care for the Future, a multi-dimensional discussion. My name is Gaurav Rastogi. I'm board member and dean at the Hindu Community Institute, and I'll be leading today's panel. This is an important topic, and to join us in this conversation, we have a fascinating and very esteemed panel that has come together, and I'm honored to lead this discussion. I'd like to introduce you to each of the panelists. First, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Kamal Abu Shamse, who's Director of Interreligious Chaplaincy Program at the Graduate Theological Union, GTU, in Berkeley. I'm going to talk to Dr. Kamal about interreligious chaplaincy education.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much, Gauravji, and thank you to the Hindu Community Institute for putting this panel together.
Next, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Asha Shipman. Asha ji is Director of Hindu Life at Yale and is also the chairperson at NACA, North American Hindu Chaplain Association. She and I are going to talk about intergenerational continuity on campus. Next on the panel, I'd like to introduce you to chaplain and Dr. Bruce Feldstein. He is a medical doctor who actually practices as a chaplain at Stanford Medicine. He's also past president of Neshama, the Association of Jewish Chaplains, which is the professional association for Jewish chaplains worldwide. And Dr. Bruce, of course, is a great friend and mentor to Hindu Community Institute. We learned a lot about compassionate presence and, in fact, what it means to be a professional chaplain from Dr. Feldstein. So, Bruce ji, welcome to the panel.
Gaurav, thank you so much. It's a real treat and pleasure to be here with you and with everyone.
Also joining us today on our panel is Reverend Sifu Anil Singh Molaris, who is Executive Director at Spiritual Directors International. He's also an ordained Zen priest and a spiritual director and care companion and a motivational speaker. Fantastic gentleman. Also a tech executive, so a person who brings a lot of technology and spirituality into our conversation today. Welcome, Sifu.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Our topic today is spiritual care for the future. This is an important topic in today's times, especially in today's times. We have seen an exponential increase in the need for spiritual care. Modern society has seen a rise in loneliness and strife with increasing human suffering and spirit, which needs to be ameliorated, which needs to be handled. Now, spiritual care can heal the spirit, can heal the society that we live in, and bring about a greater sense of care and togetherness. But how do we make this happen? How do we create this sort of spiritual care for the future in a world that desperately needs it? Let's see a few signs of this need for spiritual care. There is a rise in the number of people that declare them to be nuns, essentially coming out of formal organized religion and still holding on to a need for spirituality, reporting as nuns, but also joining yoga studios and engaging with other spiritual communities. We are also seeing a rise in loneliness. 61% Americans report being lonely. There is, in fact, a lot of talk about the loneliness epidemic. The question really is, how do we progress toward a more caring community? How do we build a system which takes into account the positive aspects of organized religions in order to create a self-organizing system of spiritual care? For thousands of years, people have created and belonged to and participated in organized religion in order to come together, for those religions to act as the glue binding the communities together. But as we start to explore non-religious traditions, non-religious identity, how do we create something new, which is a self-organizing system of spiritual care? Now, I come at it from a unique perspective of the Hindu tradition, which is the tradition I was born in. And the Hindu tradition has traditionally been very different from the way Western society is organized. The Western society, the way we see it, is organized around a Judeo Christian framework, which is to say, the temple, the church, the synagogue, the mosque are the centers of the community. But the Hindu society traditionally does not organize that way. It's far more self organized, where different needs are being fulfilled by different parts of the community. And now we find ourselves in a world which is between these two worlds, where organized religion is somewhat less dominant right now. And we Hindus find ourselves, for example, in the diaspora, without the framework within which our society tends to function and communicate. We're going to have to work together and create something together. And that brings us to this panel, esteemed guests who are helping us in the Hindu community learn from you and helping us create something unique and interesting and truly wonderful. Now, the topic for today's conversation comes from a really hard conversation we had with the president of GTU. And at that time, we were only interested in creating volunteers to serve the community as counselors of Hindu tradition. And and the president leaned on us and he said, look, you need to think about a continuum of care between volunteers and professionals. It's not enough to just have volunteers. And so we started thinking about how we can create a scalable and self-organizing system of spiritual care, connecting to places and people that need spiritual care with with volunteers as well as professional chaplains and spiritual care providers, which belong to a knowledge and relational network of commitment and practice. This is important, but also in place a social infrastructure. The vision we have is, remember back in the day, you knew the taxi guy in your community, you had their phone number, you called them when you needed them. But now you don't have a one-to-one relationship. There is a many-to-many relationship. You just look up Uber and you call the taxi and it shows up. Can we have that sort of arrangement with spiritual care? A many-to-many relationship. And that allows us to be scalable. And that's the context for today's panel. I'm going to begin by asking Dr. Kamal, how can an interreligious approach to chaplaincy work? Dr. Kamal?
What's such a great question and challenging one at the same time? With every challenge, there is an opportunity, and we do have an opportunity now. Number one is the opportunity to communicate with you through this podium as Zoom, even though we would love to be in person with you. Considering that also the opportunity in this pandemic that it brought minds and hearts from all over the world together that otherwise we would not have the opportunity to do so. When we consider chaplaincy, when we consider how can we approach interreligious approach to chaplaincy is not that different from how we live our lives, how we dialogue as multi-faith communities in the 21st century. How do we live our lives as human beings in this world in the 21st century? Number one, we don't live in a vacuum. That means we are not in an enclosed society, members of the same faith, completely isolated from one another. We don't live a monastic life. We live an interfaith life every single day in every decision that we make, whether be it what you have for breakfast, what we have for lunch. We cross cultures, even for a simple matter of let's join for a meal. And during that joining, we negotiate. We are always working and living in a life that we negotiate with our laws, with our ethics, and with the environment that we are in. what dietary needs we have. We negotiate that even as we join together, members of the same group or members of interfaith groups. What foods can I eat? It goes along with how can I live an interfaith and how can I deliver interfaith chaplaincy? It comes down to one thing. This one thing is the shared humanity that when we meet together, whether it for a meal, whether it for interfaith dialogue, whether be it for providing spiritual care for a same faith environment or in a multi-faith environment, is we join to affirm our own humanity and the humanity of others. That is the simple recipe for success in any given situation. For me as a Muslim, the foundation that I have in the Quran, that God bestowed the honor and dignity on the offspring of Adam. So that honor and dignity extends to my own community, my own family, and the human race altogether. So when we join in honoring one another. This honoring of one another in a interfaith setting, whether be it dialogue, whether be it providing spiritual care, it starts with simple questions. Who is the person that I'm dealing with, and what are their needs, and how can I serve them? So the basic foundation of multi-interfaith, multi-faith chaplaincy is service to humanity. So we come together to serve people, and this service is based on a person who has the ability to provide and a person who is vulnerable. So in that sense, there is a foundation of ethics that needs to be in place is, first of all, not to take advantage of the pain and the suffering of the people who are there, to uplift them. In a way, when we say to bear witness, is to be with them, to respect and to be humbled by the invitation that we are in the presence and joining with a community, with a member who is in pain. And it is our responsibility to the human race, whether be it from a humanitarian or from a religious theological understanding, is to empower. So this empowerment comes in from being able to sit down with the individual, giving them time to hear with them and to help them navigate what is happening in their life and how we can utilize whatever in their lives to solve or to have them survive what's going on. So that is the first foundation of how can interfaith, multi-faith chaplaincy help people at times of need. The second one, when it comes to the needs themselves, the first and foremost threat to our human existence is extremism. Extremism that works to negate the other while elevating the self. And that happens within same faith and within multi-faith approach. You have within the same faith denomination that said we are the only path that is right and everything is doomed, and that erases the pluralism, the foundation of we are all one, yet we are all different. So we're not here about erasing differences. The late oldest daughter of the Reverend Martin Luther King, Yolanda King, said, let's talk about differences. Let's talk about differences until differences make no differences. So we talk about the differences for the sake of understanding. If I don't understand what's important to you, if I don't understand what's the differences that we have, there is no respect, there is no appreciation to the differences that we have that makes every person unique. So chaplaincy and interfaith chaplaincy, because of the vulnerability of the communities that we're dealing with, proselytization or forcing one's own faith and dogmas and theology on the other is the major threat to chaplaincy, that we must be united together to say, you don't push your faith on other people at times of need, including pushing an approach to prayers. When people say simply, just pray for me, easily I can pull out a prayer from the reservoir of prayers that I have from my own tradition and deliver a prayer that is authentic to me. However, if it's about serving the other, it has to first and foremost consider the needs of the other. So a simple question such as, what would you like me to pray for? How do you normally pray? Do you pray sitting, holding hands? Who do you call upon in prayers? So those simple questions, and being mindful of the opening. How do you call the divine? How do you call the importance, what is important to you, and how you end it, and what you ask, and who you ask for? All these have significance to the person who's receiving that. And also for ourselves, when we go in and with the intention of being with someone who's in need.
Thank you, Dr. Kamal. Now I'd like to invite Ashaji to talk to us about intergenerational continuity on campuses. Ashaji?
Namaste. I'd like to thank Gaurav Ji and the Hindu Community Institute for inviting me to participate on this panel. I join you as the chair of the North American Hindu Chaplains Association, or NACA. NACA has partnered with HCI on their grand vision of expanding chaplaincy or spiritual care to our Hindu communities within institutions in the United States. Today, I will specifically comment on Hindu chaplaincy in higher education. College is a time of personal discernment and identity formation. Students are studying hard and exploring career opportunities. They're participating in non-curricular activities to develop their avocations. They're establishing friendships and hopefully exploring their spirituality. It is a very tender, joyous, exhausting, and sometimes confusing time. And the need for mentors is particularly important. We hope that their families continue to play a major role in their lives. But away from home, mentors can be professors, coaches, deans, upper-level students, and we hope, Hindu chaplains. Many people I meet wonder, what is a Hindu chaplain? And from my perspective in higher education, a Hindu chaplain is someone who is professionally trained to offer spiritual care, who has their own spiritual grounding, but whose work is not attached to religious institutions per se. Instead, it is attached to the culture of their university. The spiritual care provided by chaplains centers on the needs and desires of their individual care recipient, in this case, our student communities. Chaplaincy in the United States has roots in the military and has expanded to higher educational settings fairly recently. While chaplaincy has a strong legacy for the Abrahamic faiths, it is growing for Buddhist communities, and we hope to nurture this profession for our Hindu communities as well. NACA, as a professional organization that supports Hindu chaplains, offers our guidelines regarding how we define Hindu chaplaincy, and we also offer our own vision of the values and ethics we think Hindu chaplains should ascribe to. I want to share this with you so you can see how it interfaces with the student populations we work with. We ground our care on the framework of the Hitaisen, the unbiased friend focused on a person's holistic well-being. We instill our work with our personal commitments to ahimsa, to non-harm, mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, to any care recipient, to dharma, to principles and traditions that form the core of our outlook, and to a recognition of the inherent diversity and richness of Hindu thought, practice, experience, and culture. We cultivate shravana, listening, and manana, reflection, in ourselves and our care recipients, with the goal that they gain resilience and a sense of clarity, meaning, and inner purpose. In this way, we walk alongside our care recipients. The generation that is now in middle school and college is Generation Z, the most ethnically, spiritually, and racially diverse generation in US history. Among the many data sources I rely on is Springtide Research Institute, because they focus specifically on Gen Z and their religiosity. This is what Springtide has discovered about Gen Z's religious outlook. 61% of 13 to 25-year-olds report an affiliation with a religious denomination or tradition. However, over 50% of them report little or no trust in religious institutions. 24% of young people with no mentors feel like their life has no meaning or purpose. Just one adult relationship reduces that percentage to 6%. Now, we know that mental health across the board in the United States, including our youngsters, has been troubling in the past decade or so. There's been a significant increase of anxiety and depression, along with other mental health challenges reported by the medical field. The pandemic has exacerbated this trend, and now more than ever, we need trained professionals who can support the mental health and spiritual flourishing of our communities. Chaplains are one part of that support network. We know that Generation Z places a high importance on their relationships, and that is where Hindu chaplains can make a huge difference in the life of a college student. Springtide suggests, and I have seen firsthand, that having an influence in a young person's life requires deep listening skills, transparency in what we can and cannot do, and demonstrated integrity and expertise in what we are trying to convey. Springtide calls this relational authority, and you can see that this is closely tied to the values that NACA promotes for Hindu chaplains. Another important fact is that chaplains are less tethered to a religious institution, so students see us as more easily engageable. Why is this important? Again, from Springtide, more than 1 in 4 young people say they have one or fewer adults they feel comfortable reaching out to when they need help. Nearly 40% say they sometimes have no one to talk to and that no one knows them really well. You may be a parent, aunt, uncle, grandparent, or godparent to a Gen Z Hindu child in college, or who will be entering college soon. You may hope that this cherished child considers Hindu traditions, philosophies, and practices as integral to their present and future self. You may hope that in college they will have someone who they feel they can trust, who they can talk to when they're troubled, and who can connect them with campus resources when they need them. You may hope they will find a home away from home with a robust community of friends to counter any effects of feeling alienated or lonely. You may hope they will connect with their faith in a deeper fashion. Perhaps you hope that there will be someone who can model how to be Hindu and successfully navigate a religiously pluralistic world. That represents much of my work as a Hindu chaplain in higher education. In closing, I ask that you consider supporting the efforts of this team of organizations hoping to develop a rich spectrum of spiritual care. Hindu chaplaincy is very new to the United States. When I began as a Hindu chaplain in 2013, there were only a handful of us in higher education. Since then, we have grown our numbers slightly, but with the formation of NACA and through partnerships with organizations like HCI, we are ramping up our efforts to spread the word about this wonderful career and support network so that Hindu chaplains can become properly trained and mentored and our Hindu communities can flourish. If you are interested in learning more about NACA and Hindu chaplaincy, if you're interested in supporting our work or joining in our efforts, please visit our website, hinduchaplains.com, and be in touch with us via our newsletter and through email, naka108@gmail.com. Thank you once again. Om Shanti.
Thank you, Ashaji. Now I'd like to turn our attention to compassionate presence. See, you see, this spiritual care is not all robotic. Even if our interaction might be mediated by a phone or a machine or the internet, how do we embed compassionate presence in everything we do? I'd like to ask Bruce Feldstein to talk to us about it. Bruce G. All right.
So I'm in thinking about this question of embedding compassionate presence and into a technology. I want to take us back to what do we mean by spiritual care in the first place, and then let us distinguish what do we mean by spiritual care and compassionate presence, and then look at the separately into the technology and the media of it. I like you and I were talking earlier about spiritual care was one-on-one, and we used, let's say back in the old days, we all lived together in the village, and I would know you, and I would say, oh, I lost somebody in my life. I'm sad, and you would know me, and you would come up, and there would be this. We were already connected, and in a one-on-one kind of way, but that's no longer our world. And not only that, we're in a world where you and I both live in the Bay Area. So you're coming from a Hindu tradition. I'm coming from a Jewish tradition. We're coming from across the Bay. And yet here you and I are joining. We're together. It's a different world. And yet in our common humanity, we share the same, we're living in the same concerns. We have the same concerns. So when I'm thinking about spiritual care, I'm thinking about, first of all, about care. It's about belonging. It recognizes that we belong to, with, for each other in a social structure. Now that's already kind of going against some of our common sense because it looks like we're very separate and divided. But as a chaplain, no, I come to see that who we are really is each other. I cannot not see that. I see that commonality now. So what do we mean by spiritual? I think about what I stand on behalf of when I go into the room. You know what? Let me just make this operational. Let me take you to the bedside as I'm about to enter in with someone, and maybe I could put a little external speaker and show you what it is I do. Let me try that out. What do you think? Because I think what we're doing in compassionate presence, and whether, so let me just talk my way through it. So I see this as creating a compassionate presence. It's a creation or a bringing forth of an architecture in time, a space, a quality of presence. And by architecture in time, I see, just like we enter into a building, and then we enter into a space, and then we exit out. There's also an architecture in time where we enter into a moment, an engagement, an encounter with someone. We engage with them in conversation, in being together, and then we exit out. So I've come to appreciate there's a structure for this, which I believe is true for all of these kind of encounters, or can be. And what it does is it simplifies it for me. And it makes it possible, whether I'm one-on-one with you in person or by Zoom. And then once we have this kind of understanding, we can then look at, well, what is a common structure or discourse or culture that we could create that everyone could then understand and be able to then access? Much like you said, okay, I need to get to the airport. I'm going to just call Uber. Now we understand Uber, and there's trust with that. We know how it works. But what about creating this kind of a system for spiritual care where whatever we're going to call it, people understand what it is. There's a trust in terms of a sincerity, an expectation, a kind of thing, so that no matter who you get, there's going to be this, certain standards are met. So let me go back to the an encounter in architecture and time. I'm about to meet with you. Let's say I get a call. Can you come and see Mr. Gaurav? And I say, sure. So I'm going to approach, and before the encounter, I want to prepare myself for it. I'm going to move from an everyday way of thinking. You know, I'm busy, I'm preoccupied, I've got this, that, and the other to do. And what I'm going to do now is I'm shifting my attention and my intention toward a sacred encounter. Can I ensure that it's sacred? No. But can I set up conditions out of which a quality experience of sacred can happen? Absolutely. So I prepare my attention and my intention. I have some particular practices. You know, we've shared that in our school together with the students of breath, of bringing my focus into my body. As you know, at the hospital, we gel in and we gel out. We have to sanitize, and so as I do, I take I imagine the gel evaporating away my preoccupations. It brings my attention to my body, to here, to now. I lift up my hands as I go in. May I be of service, I remind myself. So I've prepared my attention, my awareness, my focus. Here, now, I've let go of my preoccupations. So what is my intention as I enter into the room, or as I enter into the conversation, or as I'm about to see your face and encounter you? What is my intention? Now, it's going to take longer for me to say these words because I now can do it with a single breath, in the time of a single breath. But it goes something like this. As I enter in to be with you, may I, this being, quality, presence, body, may I join with you in your world as it is for you. And here's the operative verb, and accompany you from there. And may I join with you and accompany you in a way that allows you to connect with your source of strength or comfort or meaning, however, whatever that is for you. And that includes the particular, let's call it the breakdown, the interruption, a suffering, a pain, a something that's incomplete. May I bring a quality of presence that allows you to connect with your source of comfort, strength, meaning, or what's interrupted, and journey with you, accompany you from there. May I listen for, and here's my definition of compassion. May I listen for what matters most for you in this moment and accompany you from there. Whatever time I have, may I be fully present with you. And now that we've joined together with this kind of intention, or with this intention, now I come into the room and I say, hello, Mr. Gaurav, my name is Bruce. And so now we actually enter into this joining, having set this up. And in the process, you know, we talk back and forth. You know, I might say, what prompts you to call today? I'm listening I'm listening for the what's missing, the why, the story, the chief concern, the what matters most. And once I listened to that, and it's taking place in the listening. I can't emphasize this part of it enough. This is crucial. It's taking place in the listening. Listening isn't just the hearing, but the listening is the way I hear and hold and interpret what you say, both in a cognitive intellectual way, but also it's taking place in mood. Very much in mood and emotion in that dimension at the same time. Just to back up, I've entered into this architecture in time by preparing my attention and intention. I cross a threshold to encounter you in your world. That means looking at you, listening, looking, visibly at the situation, hearing you, sensing you, moving into the realm of words, listening to you as your words enter into me and touch me somewhere. I speak your words, so my voice enters into you. There's a joining that takes place. We enter into conversation. We have something is triggered within that it prompts me to care about, for, with you, to guide, to talk, to laugh, to cry, to be silent, to take your hand, spoken, unspoken, these kind of things. What can I wish for you? And then to take leave, to exit.
Coming next to you, Sifu, I'd like to ask you, because at SDI you see a lot of interfaith, multi-faith spiritual directors, how are you seeing the shifting religion to spirituality dynamics? How is that changing the field of spiritual direction? How does it improve it? What challenges are you seeing and sensing?
Yeah. So I think the main thing that we are seeing is a shift towards essence. And when I say a shift towards essence, it's really a profound desire for authenticity. And a lot of the cohort that you were describing, the spiritual but not religious or spiritual independence, are really folks who are looking for this authenticity in many different places with some suspicion against established religious institutions. And that's, a long conversation that we can have some other day. It's not particularly germane to our conversation today, other than to say that really what drives them is they're very spiritually hungry and they're really desiring authenticity, free from hierarchies, power structures, power dynamics, complicated institutional norms that they see with some justification, in my opinion, as taking people further away from a spiritual connection rather than closer to it. So I think that's part of what's driving is this desire for spiritual authenticity. I'd say that the challenge that we face is to convince people not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? That all of our traditions, and we'll talk about the Hindu tradition in particular, or the Buddhist tradition that I am a part of, where I would say I'm spiritual and religious, not spiritual and not religious, because I believe that spirituality is at the essence of our religious traditions, and that in spite of all of the distortions that many institutions that house them can manifest, there is still that authenticity within our systems. So I'd say two ways to the divine, two ways to spirit, to all that which has 1,000 names and is nameless at the same time, is there needs to be a method, right? There needs to be some way to engage deeply. And that's important because we need to be able to hold on to handrails as we navigate into the beyond, if you will. And I'm mixing language here, but we need a lot of structure to attain the lack of structure. Or to attain freedom, I should say, right? The ultimate goal is freedom and liberation. And yet the paradox is you need a lot of discipline and a lot of focus and a lot of study and perseverance to be able to enter. That's for most people, at least. There's some exceptions, but for most people, it requires a lot of, developing good habits, developing good modalities, strengthening ourselves on the road so that we could eventually become unbound, if you will, and free to benefit others. Because once we attain our own realization and communion with the infinite, then it feeds back to us with instructions, if you will, that says, this is not just for you. There is no, this is for everyone. And it's now your job to try to benefit as many other people as you can. So I think that's the main challenge that I see is to have people recognize that there is great depth, insight, and beauty in existing religious traditions, and to guide them faithfully and authentically to the heart of those traditions.
It's great. Now, you talked about the challenge of people being suspicious with reason or otherwise of organized religion, and as people are becoming, but the spiritual hunger is very much there. You're saying,
yeah.
How are they coming to spiritual direction? How is that changing the field of spiritual direction?
Yeah, so I think what is changing is that that spiritual companions or counselors or directors, or however you want to define yourself or other people may define us, really have to be far more versatile than they have been historically, right? It's not enough to say, this is what the tradition says, right? You have to inform it with the reality of the moment that we're living through, a reality that encompasses all sorts of challenges that, the pandemics of various kinds, of racism, of nationalism, of health emergencies, of matters that really kind of bring matters of life and death to the forefront of what we need to deal. So I think spiritual counselors need more tools than ever. And it's really a combination of these tools. And we were talking a little bit earlier about spirituality in a secular setting. Well, those two are not necessarily opposed. I think the job of a good spiritual counselor or companion is to integrate so that people who come to us can see that spirituality is directly relevant to every decision that they make in their lives, to every action that they undertake, to everything that they see and witness has a spiritual dimension if they just look from a slightly different perspective. I think most of us are just rushing by things, right? Running so fast and so determined that we miss everything that's there, that's already telling us how we need to behave, how we need to act in the world from a spiritual perspective. So I think that's the main challenge that spiritual companions and spiritual guides, counselors have, is they need more tools. We need more tools in our arsenal to be able to respond to the very complicated dynamics that are in front of us today.
Thank you, Sifu. Wow, this has been a tremendous learning experience. I have truly enjoyed this conversation and have taken so many notes. It's very clear that the spiritual care that we need is possible if we all work together. Spiritual care of the future will include the best of thought and insight that we have from traditional religion, but will incorporate within it the use of technology to reach more people, the use of continued extension of compassionate presence into every conversation, a interfaith and interreligious dialogue that allows us to learn from each other and create something truly unique and wonderful. A system of self-organization is important, and it seems obviously within reach. This conversation has just begun. Today's conversation lays the groundwork, we hope, for many such conversations and action into the future. We're looking forward to hearing from you. So thank you very much for joining this panel. And if you'd like to participate, if you'd like to engage, you have feedback, please send us an email. I'm going to moderate on behalf of this panel, so send an email at the email address you're seeing here. And tell us how you feel, tell us your ideas, and if you want to partner, tell us that as well. We look forward to hearing from you and to truly bringing out a new kind of spiritual care for the future. Thank you very much to everyone on the panel. Thank you very much, and namaskar.